The rain hammered against the windows of Mount Sinai Hospital as I sat in the cold plastic chair beside my daughter's bed, watching the machines that kept her tiny body alive. At 26, I thought I understood what difficult looked like, working 2 jobs to pay for nursing school, raising a 3-year-old alone after my husband left when he found out about Emma's condition. But nothing had prepared me for this moment. Mrs. Catherine Walsh, the voice belonged to Dr. Martinez, the pediatric neurologist who had become a constant presence in our lives over the past 6 months. Her expression was gentle but serious as she approached Emma's bedside. "It's just Catherine," I corrected quietly, the same response I'd given dozens of medical professionals since Emma's diagnosis. No husband, no support system, just me and a daughter whose brain was slowly being destroyed by a rare genetic disorder called Tay-Sachs disease. "Catherine," Dr. Martinez said softly, pulling up a chair beside me. "We need to discuss Emma's care options moving forward." I already knew what she was going to say. Emma was 4 years old now, but her development had stopped at 18 months when the symptoms first appeared. The bright, chattering toddler who used to dance to music from our old radio had gradually lost the ability to sit up, to swallow, to recognize my face. The doctors had told me from the beginning that children with Tay-Sachs rarely lived past age 5. "How much time does she have?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's difficult to say with certainty," Dr. Martinez replied. "Perhaps months, perhaps a year. But Catherine, there's something I need to discuss with you about a research program at Columbia Presbyterian." I looked at Emma's peaceful face, so small against the white hospital pillow. She looked like she was sleeping, but I knew she hadn't been truly conscious in weeks. The feeding tube in her nose, the IV lines in her arms, the breathing machine that helped her lungs work. She was more machine than child now. "What kind of research?" I asked. Dr. Martinez pulled out a folder thick with medical documents. "It's an experimental treatment program for children with degenerative neurological conditions. Very new, very intensive, and there are no guarantees. But in some cases, we've seen remarkable stabilization of symptoms, even some improvement in quality of life." Hope was a dangerous thing when your child was dying. I'd learned that lesson over the past 2 years as we'd tried every treatment, every therapy, every prayer that might help Emma. Each time, hope had turned to disappointment, and disappointment had carved another piece out of my heart. "What would it involve?" I asked. "Weekly treatments at Columbia, intensive monitoring, a cocktail of experimental medications. The program requires a 5-year commitment, and Catherine, the side effects can be severe. Some children experience seizures, organ complications, behavioral changes that can be difficult for families to manage." I watched Emma's chest rise and fall with the rhythm of the ventilator. My beautiful daughter, who used to sing herself to sleep with made-up songs about princesses and dragons, hadn't made a sound in 3 months. "Is she suffering?" I asked the question that haunted my dreams. "We don't believe so," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "Her brain activity suggests she's not experiencing pain or distress. But Catherine, I have to be honest with you. This experimental program is uncharted territory. We don't know what the long-term effects might be, physically or mentally. The decision felt impossible. Let Emma die peacefully, or subject her to years of experimental treatments that might prolong her life, but could also cause her additional suffering." I was 26 years old, alone, and being asked to make a choice that no parent should ever have to face. "I need some time to think," I said. Dr. Martinez nodded and stood to leave, but paused at the foot of Emma's bed. "Catherine, there's one more thing. Nurse Patricia Sullivan from the pediatric ICU asked to speak with you. She's worked with many families in similar situations." 15 minutes later, Nurse Sullivan appeared in Emma's doorway. She was about 50, with graying brown hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too much sadness, but still held compassion. She'd been caring for Emma during her hospital stays, and I'd noticed how gentle she was, how she talked to Emma as if she could hear every word. "Catherine, may I sit with you for a moment?" she asked. I nodded, and she took the chair Dr. Martinez had vacated. "I've been a pediatric nurse for 28 years, she began. "I've seen hundreds of families face impossible decisions about their children's care, and I want you to know that whatever you decide, it will be the right choice because it will come from love." Tears started flowing down my cheeks before I could stop them. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "I can't let her suffer, but I can't give up on her either." Nurse Sullivan reached over and took my hand. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at Emma?" I nodded, unable to speak. "I see a little girl who is deeply loved by her mother, a child who has brought joy and meaning to your life, even in the midst of this tragedy. And Catherine, I believe that love, your love, is the most powerful medicine we have." She paused, looking directly into my eyes. "Don't give up on this child now," she said firmly. "Not because of what the doctors say might happen, not because you're scared of making the wrong choice. Emma needs you to fight for her, even if that fight looks different than you imagined. You think I should try the experimental program? I think you should trust your instincts as Emma's mother," she replied. "But yes, I've seen what Dr. Rodriguez and her team at Columbia can do. It's not a cure, Catherine, but it might give Emma and you more time together, quality time." That night, I stayed beside Emma's bed, holding her small hand and thinking about Nurse Sullivan's words. Don't give up on this child now. At 3 a.m., watching my daughter's face in the dim light from the monitors, I made my decision. "Okay, baby girl," I whispered to Emma. "We're going to try one more thing. Mommy's not ready to say goodbye yet." I had no idea that this choice would haunt me for the next 25 years, or that Emma would grow up to uncover a truth about her treatment that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the decision I'd made that rainy night in 1999. Columbia Presbyterian Children's Hospital buzzed with activity even at 7 in the morning as I carried Emma through the pediatric research wing. At 4 years old, she weighed barely 30 pounds, her body weakened by months of Tay-Sachs progression. But for the first time in weeks, her eyes seemed alert, tracking the colorful murals on the walls as we made our way to Dr. Elena Rodriguez's office. "Catherine, Emma, welcome to our program," Dr. Rodriguez said warmly as we entered her consultation room. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with an intensity that made me believe she genuinely cared about helping children like Emma. "How is she responding to the preliminary medications, Doctor?" Rodriguez asked, reviewing Emma's chart while I settled her into a specialized pediatric chair. "Better than I hoped," I admitted. "She's been more responsive, making eye contact again. Yesterday she even tried to smile when I sang to her." It had been 3 weeks since we'd enrolled in the experimental program, and the changes in Emma were subtle but undeniable. The blank stare that had terrified me for months was being replaced by glimpses of the daughter I remembered. "That's exactly what we hope to see," Dr. Rodriguez said. "The treatment protocol we've developed targets the enzyme deficiency that causes Tay-Sachs symptoms. We can't reverse the damage that's already occurred, but we may be able to slow or stop further deterioration." She pulled out a complex chart showing Emma's treatment schedule. "For the next 5 years, Emma will receive weekly infusions of enzyme replacement therapy, along with supportive medications to protect her organs from potential side effects." 5 years? I repeated. The commitment felt enormous when I was barely managing to get through each day. "I know it seems overwhelming," Dr. Rodriguez said gently. "But Catherine, what we're offering Emma is unprecedented. She would be part of a groundbreaking study that could help children with Tay-Sachs around the world." As if on cue, Emma made a soft sound, the first vocalization I'd heard from her in months. Both Dr. Rodriguez and I turned to look at her, and she was staring directly at me with recognition in her eyes. "Mama," she whispered, the word barely audible but unmistakably clear. I burst into tears, reaching for Emma's hand. "Yes, baby, Mama's here." Dr. Rodriguez made notes on her chart, unable to hide her excitement. "This level of responsiveness after just 3 weeks is remarkable. Catherine, I believe Emma is going to do very well in this program." Over the following months, our lives fell into a routine centered around Emma's treatment schedule. Every Tuesday, we would take the subway from our small apartment in Queens to Columbia Presbyterian. I'd bring books to read to Emma during her 4-hour infusion sessions, and slowly, miraculously, she began to respond. By month 6, Emma was sitting up unassisted again. By month 12, she was attempting to feed herself with adaptive utensils. Her speech returned gradually, single words at first, then simple sentences. The doctors were amazed by her progress, calling her a remarkable responder to the experimental therapy. But the treatment came with costs beyond the financial burden. Emma experienced seizures as a side effect of the medications, requiring additional hospitalizations. Her personality seemed different too, more withdrawn, less playful than she'd been before the Tay-Sachs symptoms appeared. Sometimes I wondered if we were saving Emma or simply creating a different version of her. "How are you holding up?" asked Nurse Sullivan during one of our visits. She had transferred to Columbia to work with Dr. Rodriguez's research team, and her presence was a comfort during the difficult days. "I'm grateful," I said honestly, "but scared too. What if the treatment stops working? What if we're just delaying the inevitable?" "Catherine, look at your daughter," Nurse Sullivan said, pointing to Emma, who was working with a speech therapist on the other side of the room. "6 months ago, you weren't sure she'd ever speak again. Now she's telling stories about her favorite cartoon characters." It was true. Emma had not only stabilized, but had begun developing again, learning new skills and forming memories. She would never be a typical child. The early brain damage from Tay-Sachs had left permanent effects, but she was alive, aware, and growing. "The treatment is working," I said, more to convince myself than Nurse Sullivan. "It is," she agreed. "But Catherine, I want you to be prepared for the possibility that Emma may ask questions about her medical history as she gets older. Children who've been through intensive medical treatment often become curious about their diagnoses, their treatments, the decisions that were made for them." I watched Emma across the room, concentrating intensely on stacking blocks with her therapist. At 5 years old, she looked like any other child engaged in play, but the medical alert bracelet on her wrist and the slight tremor in her hands told a different story. "What kind of questions?" I asked. "Why she needs so much medical care? Why she's different from other children? What might have happened if different choices had been made?" Nurse Sullivan explained. "It's natural curiosity, but it can be challenging for parents to navigate." Over the next 4 years, as Emma continued to thrive in the experimental program, I often thought about Nurse Sullivan's warning. Emma did ask questions about her medications, about why we spent so much time at the hospital, about why she couldn't do all the things her classmates could do. I answered her questions as honestly as I could, explaining that she had been very sick as a baby, but that doctors had found a way to help her get better. I told her she was brave and strong, that she was helping other children by being part of the research program. What I didn't tell her was that I sometimes lay awake at night wondering if I had made the right choice. Emma was alive, but she would never be completely healthy. She would always need medical care, always be dependent on treatments that might stop working at any time. By the time Emma turned 9 and graduated from the experimental program, she had defied every prediction the doctors had made about her life expectancy. But as she grew older and more independent, I began to fear that someday she would want to know the complete truth about her medical history, including details about her treatment that I wasn't sure I was ready to share. I had no idea that 25 years later, Emma would walk into my living room with medical records that would reveal the devastating truth about the experimental program that had saved her life and the price that other children had paid for her survival. 15 years had passed since Emma graduated from the experimental program at Columbia Presbyterian, and watching her cross the stage at NYU to receive her bachelor's degree in social work felt like witnessing a miracle. At 24, she was beautiful, intelligent, and determined to help other families navigate the medical system that had shaped her childhood. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," I said, hugging her tightly as she joined me after the ceremony. The cap and gown couldn't hide the slight tremor in her hands or the medical alert bracelet she still wore, but Emma had grown into a confident young woman who refused to let her medical history define her limitations. "Thanks, Mom," she said, her smile radiant. "I never would have made it this far without everything you did for me when I was little." We celebrated that evening at her favorite restaurant in Greenwich Village, talking about her plans to work with families dealing with pediatric medical crises. Emma had always been drawn to helping others, and I suspected her own experiences with chronic illness had given her a unique perspective on resilience and hope. "I've been thinking about applying for a position at Mount Sinai," she said over dessert. "They have an excellent family support program for children with rare diseases." Mount Sinai, where Emma's journey had begun 20 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that she wanted to return to the hospital where I'd made the desperate decision to enroll her in experimental treatment. "Are you sure you want to work so close to all of that?" I asked carefully. Emma nodded decisively. "Mom, what happened to me when I was little wasn't just about being sick. It was about having a mother who fought for me, doctors who were willing to try new approaches, and a medical team that saw me as more than just a diagnosis. I want to be part of that for other families." Over the next 2 years, Emma thrived in her position at Mount Sinai. She worked primarily with families whose children had been diagnosed with rare genetic disorders, helping them understand treatment options and navigate insurance complications. Her colleagues respected her combination of professional training and personal insight, and parents trusted her in ways they sometimes couldn't trust doctors who had never lived through a medical crisis. But I began to notice changes in Emma that worried me. She became increasingly interested in medical research, particularly studies involving children with Tay-Sachs and other genetic disorders. She would stay late at the hospital, reading research papers and attending medical conferences that weren't directly related to her social work responsibilities. "Emma, you seem to be spending a lot of time on research lately," I mentioned during one of our weekly dinners. "Is everything okay at work?" She hesitated before answering, a habit she'd developed when she was processing complex emotions. "Mom, can I ask you something about when I was little?" My heart rate increased. These conversations had become more frequent over the past year, and I sensed Emma was building toward questions I wasn't sure I could answer. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Do you remember the names of the other children who were in the experimental program with me?" The question caught me off guard. During Emma's treatment years, I had been so focused on her progress that I hadn't paid much attention to the other families in the program. There had been maybe a dozen children total, ranging in age from toddlers to elementary school students. "Not really," I admitted. "There was a little boy named Marcus, who was about your age, and a girl called Sophia, who was younger." "Why do you ask?" Emma was quiet for a moment, staring at her plate. "I've been trying to find information about the long-term outcomes of Dr. Rodriguez's research program. For my work at the hospital, I want to be able to give accurate information to families considering experimental treatments." "That makes sense," I said, though something in her tone made me uneasy. "The thing is, Mom, I can't find much follow-up data about the other children who were in the program with me. And when I've tried to contact Dr. Rodriguez or access the research records through Columbia, I keep getting told that the information is confidential or that records from that time period are no longer available." I felt a chill run down my spine. Maybe the other families chose to keep their information private. "Maybe," Emma said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Mom, do you remember signing any documents when I was in the program? Consent forms, research agreements, anything that might explain why it's so difficult to get information about the study?" I remembered signing mountains of paperwork during Emma's treatment years, but I'd been so overwhelmed and desperate that I hadn't read most of it carefully. I trusted Dr. Rodriguez and her team completely, believing they were doing everything possible to help Emma survive. "I signed whatever the doctors asked me to sign," I said honestly. "I was just focused on getting you better." Emma nodded, but I could see she wasn't satisfied with my answer. Over the following months, her questions became more specific and more frequent. She wanted to know details about her medications, about the side effects she'd experienced, about why her treatment had been successful when Tay-Sachs was supposed to be universally fatal. I began to dread our weekly dinners, knowing they would inevitably turn into interrogations about Emma's medical history. Part of me was proud that she had become such an advocate for medical transparency, but another part was terrified that her digging would uncover something that would change how she viewed her childhood and how she viewed me. One evening in late fall, Emma arrived at my apartment with a manila folder thick with documents. "Mom, I need you to look at something," she said, her expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. As she spread the papers across my dining room table, I realized that my worst fears about Emma's questions were about to become reality. Whatever she had discovered about her treatment, whatever truth she had uncovered after 25 years of searching, was about to change everything between us. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my hands shaking as I reached for the documents. "That's not important right now," Emma said quietly. "What's important is what they say about the experimental program that saved my life and what happened to the other children who weren't as lucky as I was." The documents spread across my dining room table looked like a collection of medical records, research notes, and what appeared to be internal correspondence from Columbia Presbyterian. Emma sat across from me, her face pale but determined, as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "Emma, what exactly am I looking at?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. "These are records from Dr. Rodriguez's experimental program," she said quietly. "Records that were supposed to be confidential but that I was able to obtain through a medical records request when I claimed to need them for my own ongoing care. I picked up the first document, a research protocol dated 1999, the year Emma had enrolled in the program. The language was dense with medical terminology, but certain phrases jumped out: experimental enzyme therapy, unknown long-term effects, significant risk of adverse outcomes. Mom, did you know that the treatment I received wasn't just experimental? It was the first human trial of its kind? Emma asked. I looked up from the papers, confusion and growing fear mixing in my chest. What do you mean? I mean that the enzyme replacement therapy that saved my life had never been tested on humans before. The dozen children in the program, including me, were essentially guinea pigs for a treatment that had only been tested in laboratory animals. The room felt like it was spinning. But Dr. Rodriguez explained the risks to me. She said there could be side effects, that there were no guarantees. Did she tell you that 3 of the children in the program died from complications directly related to the treatment? Emma asked, pulling out another document. Or that 2 others developed severe neurological damage that was worse than their original conditions? I stared at the paper she handed me, a summary of program outcomes that showed Emma's remarkable recovery, alongside a list of other children who had not been so fortunate. Marcus, the little boy I remembered seeing during our hospital visits, had died of organ failure in year 2 of the program. Sophia, the younger girl, had survived, but developed seizures so severe that she required institutional care. Emma, I didn't know, I whispered. Dr. Rodriguez never told me that other children were dying. According to these records, the researchers weren't required to inform participating families about adverse outcomes in real time, Emma said, her voice steady but strained. Each family was only told about their own child's progress and risks. I felt sick to my stomach as I continued reading. The documents revealed that Emma's success had been extraordinary, not just because she had survived, but because she was the only child in the program who had experienced significant improvement without major complications. So I was lucky, Emma said, though there was no joy in her voice. Incredibly, impossibly lucky. But Mom, do you understand what this means? I looked at my daughter, who had grown into a beautiful, intelligent woman because of a treatment that had killed other children. It means that your survival came at a terrible price. It means that my survival was built on the suffering of other children whose parents made the same desperate choice you made, Emma corrected. And it means that for 25 years, I've been living with the benefits of their sacrifice without even knowing it. The weight of this revelation was crushing. I thought about the other families I had seen in the waiting rooms at Columbia Presbyterian. Parents who looked as desperate and hopeful as I had felt. Parents who had trusted Dr. Rodriguez and her team to help their children, just as I had trusted them to help Emma. What happened to Dr. Rodriguez? I asked. Emma pulled out another document, a newspaper clipping from 2003. She left Columbia after the program ended and moved to Switzerland to work for a pharmaceutical company. The research data from the program was used to develop a safer version of the enzyme therapy that's now standard treatment for Tay-Sachs. But she made millions from the patents, while the families of the children who died received nothing. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what Emma had discovered. My daughter was alive because other children had died. Her recovery had paved the way for better treatments, but at a cost that felt incomprehensible. Emma, I'm so sorry, I said finally. If I had known, what would you have done differently? She asked, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. If you had known that enrolling me in the program might save my life, but could also contribute to other children's deaths, would you have chosen differently? It was an impossible question. I looked at Emma, brilliant, compassionate, alive, and tried to imagine making a different choice in that hospital room 25 years ago. I don't know, I admitted. I was desperate to save you. I would have tried anything. That's what I was afraid you'd say, Emma said quietly. What do you mean? Emma wiped her eyes and gathered the documents back into a neat pile. Mom, I've spent the last 6 months trying to understand how I could build a career helping families make medical decisions when my own survival was based on such an ethically questionable choice. Emma, you were a child. You had no control over the decisions I made. But I've benefited from those decisions every day for 25 years, she said. I got to grow up, go to college, have a career, while Marcus and Sophia and the other children never got those opportunities. How do I live with that knowledge? I reached across the table and took her hand. You live with it by using your life to help other people, by making sure that families today have better information and better choices than we had 25 years ago. Is that enough? She asked. Is doing good work now enough to balance the scales for what happened then? I didn't have an answer for her. How do you weigh one life against another? How do you measure the value of Emma's contributions to the world against the potential contributions of the children who died so she could live? Emma, what are you planning to do with these documents? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the manila folder. I think I need to try to find the other families, the ones whose children didn't survive the program. They deserve to know what happened, and they deserve some kind of acknowledgement for their loss. And then what? I don't know yet, she admitted, but I can't keep pretending that my recovery was just a miracle. It was a miracle built on tragedy, and I think it's time for me to face that truth. As Emma left my apartment that night, taking the documents with her, I realized that our relationship would never be the same. The little girl I had fought so hard to save had grown into a woman who was strong enough to confront the darkest truths about her survival. But I also realized that Emma's questions weren't finished. The documents she had shown me were just the beginning of a much larger investigation into the experimental program that had saved her life. And I feared that what she discovered next would be even more devastating than what she had already learned. 2 months after Emma showed me the documents about her experimental treatment, she called to ask if I would accompany her to a meeting. Her voice was different, more serious, more adult than I'd ever heard it. "Mom, I found them," she said without preamble when I answered the phone. "Found who?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "The families, the parents of the children who died in the program. 3 of them live in the New York area, and they've agreed to meet with us." My heart sank. For weeks, I'd been hoping Emma would eventually let her investigation go, that she would decide to focus on her future rather than digging deeper into the past. But I should have known better. Emma had inherited my stubbornness along with my determination. "Emma, are you sure this is a good idea? What if meeting these families makes things worse for everyone involved?" "Mom, a woman named Patricia Chen lost her son Marcus in that program. Her little boy died because of complications from the same treatment that saved my life. Don't you think she deserves to know that at least one child survived? Don't you think she deserves to know that Marcus's sacrifice contributed to something meaningful?" When she put it that way, I couldn't argue, but I was terrified of what these conversations might reveal, both about the program and about the choices I had made 25 years ago. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at a community center in Midtown Manhattan. Emma and I arrived early, and I watched my daughter nervously arrange and rearrange her notes while we waited for the other families to arrive. Patricia Chen was the first to walk through the door. She was about my age, with graying black hair and eyes that held the particular kind of sadness that comes from losing a child. Behind her was a man I assumed was her husband, and a young woman who looked to be in her 20s, probably a daughter or daughter-in-law. "Mrs. Chen?" Emma stood and extended her hand. "I'm Emma Walsh. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us." Patricia shook Emma's hand and studied her face intently. "You're the one who survived," she said quietly. "You look healthy." "Yes, ma'am. I was very lucky." Patricia nodded and took a seat across from us. "Marcus would have been 29 years old now," she said. "He loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist when he grew up." The simple statement hit me like a physical blow. Marcus had been a real child with real dreams, not just a name in Emma's medical files. His death had been the price of Emma's survival, and sitting across from his mother made that reality impossible to ignore. 2 other families arrived over the next few minutes: the Kowalski family, whose daughter Anna had died in year 3 of the program, and Robert Martinez, whose son David had survived the treatment but suffered severe brain damage that left him requiring full-time care. "Before we begin," Emma said once everyone was seated, "I want you all to know that I had no idea about the full scope of what happened in Dr. Rodriguez's program until recently. My mother and I thought I was just incredibly fortunate to recover from Tay-Sachs disease." "Your mother never told you about the other children?" asked Mrs. Kowalski, her tone more curious than accusatory. "I didn't know what happened to the other children," I said, finding my voice. "The medical team never shared information about other families' outcomes. We were only told about Emma's progress." Robert Martinez leaned forward. "That's exactly what they told us too. We thought David's complications were unusual, that most children in the program were doing better than he was. Emma pulled out copies of the documents she had shown me months earlier. According to these records, the researchers deliberately kept families isolated from each other to prevent us from comparing notes about outcomes. They were afraid that if families knew how many children were experiencing serious complications, they would withdraw from the program. Patricia Chen examined the papers with the careful attention of someone who had spent years trying to understand what had happened to her son. This research summary shows that Marcus died of liver failure caused by the enzyme therapy, but Dr. Rodriguez told us his death was due to progression of his underlying disease. They lied to you, Emma said gently. They lied to all of us. For the next 2 hours, we compared our experiences with the experimental program. The families shared stories about their children. Marcus's love of dinosaurs, Anna's talent for singing, David's gentle personality before the brain damage changed him. Emma listened with tears streaming down her face as she learned about the children whose suffering had made her recovery possible. I don't know how to live with this knowledge, Emma said finally. I don't know how to honor their memory or make their sacrifice meaningful. You honor them by using your life well, Patricia Chen said firmly. Marcus died so that doctors could learn how to help other children. If you spend your life helping families navigate medical decisions, then his death wasn't completely in vain. But it doesn't bring him back, Emma said. No, Patricia agreed. Nothing will bring any of them back. But Emma, I want you to understand something. I don't blame you for surviving. I don't blame your mother for making the same choice I made. We were all desperate parents trying to save our children. Mrs. Kowalski nodded in agreement. What I blame are the doctors who didn't give us complete information about the risks. What I blame is a system that allowed researchers to experiment on children without proper oversight. As the meeting ended, Emma exchanged contact information with all 3 families. She promised to keep them updated on her efforts to find Dr. Rodriguez and demand accountability for what had happened in the experimental program. On the subway ride home, Emma was quiet for a long time. Finally, she looked at me and said, "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Okay," I said, though I dreaded what was coming next. "If you could go back to that night at Mount Sinai 25 years ago, knowing what you know now about the other children who would die, would you still enroll me in the program?" I looked at my daughter, beautiful, intelligent, compassionate, and thought about the impossible choice she was asking me to make in retrospect. "Yes," I said quietly. "I would still try to save you, even knowing the cost. And Emma, that makes me a terrible person, but it also makes me your mother." Emma took my hand as our train pulled into our station. "It doesn't make you terrible, Mom. It makes you human. But now I have to figure out how to live with being the child who survived and how to make that survival count for something." As we walked home through the streets of Queens, I realized that Emma's investigation was far from over. She had found the families, learned their stories, and begun to understand the full scope of what had happened 25 years ago. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't finished. Emma was planning something bigger, something that would force the medical community to confront what had been done in the name of research. And I was afraid that whatever she did next would cost her more than she was prepared to pay. 1 year after our meeting with the other families, Emma called me with news that both thrilled and terrified me. "Mom, I found Dr. Rodriguez. I was in my kitchen making dinner when the call came, and I had to sit down at the table to steady myself." "Where is she?" "She's living in Geneva, working as a consultant for a pharmaceutical company that develops treatments for rare diseases. Mom, she's become incredibly wealthy from the patents that came out of her research program, the same research that killed Marcus and Anna and damaged David." Over the past year, Emma had thrown herself into investigating the aftermath of the experimental program with the same intensity she brought to everything else in her life. She had contacted medical ethics boards, spoken with journalists who specialized in healthcare reporting, and even hired a private investigator to track down Dr. Rodriguez's current whereabouts. "What are you planning to do?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "I'm going to Switzerland to confront her," Emma said. "And I'm not going alone. Patricia Chen and Mrs. Kowalski have agreed to come with me. We're going to demand that she acknowledge what happened to our families and that she establish a fund to support medical research ethics education." The plan was ambitious and risky. Dr. Rodriguez had no legal obligation to meet with them, and there was no guarantee she would take responsibility for the deaths and injuries that had resulted from her research program. Emma, what if she refuses to see you? What if this trip accomplishes nothing except reopening old wounds? Then at least we'll have tried, Emma replied. Mom, I can't keep living my life pretending that my survival was just a medical miracle. These families deserve acknowledgement, and the medical community needs to understand what happens when researchers prioritize scientific advancement over patient welfare. 2 weeks later, I found myself at JFK Airport, watching Emma board a plane to Geneva with Patricia Chen and Mrs. Kowalski. Despite my fears about the trip, I was proud of my daughter's courage in confronting the most difficult truth of her life. Emma called me every day from Switzerland, updating me on their efforts to arrange a meeting with Dr. Rodriguez. For 3 days, they were turned away from her office building, told that she was unavailable and that they should contact her legal representatives if they had concerns about her past research. On the 4th day, Emma's call came at 3 a.m. New York time. Mom, she agreed to see us, Emma said, her voice exhausted but determined. Tomorrow morning at her office, she'll give us 1 hour. How did you convince her? Patricia Chen contacted a Swiss medical journal and told them she wanted to publish an article about the long-term outcomes of experimental pediatric research. Apparently, Dr. Rodriguez decided she'd rather meet with us privately than risk negative publicity in the European medical community. The next evening, Emma called again, this time with Patricia and Mrs. Kowalski on speakerphone so they could all describe the meeting together. She's exactly what you'd expect, Emma began. Successful, polished, completely comfortable with the choices she made 25 years ago. Did she take responsibility for what happened to Marcus? I asked. Patricia Chen's voice was tight with controlled anger. She said that Marcus's death was an unfortunate but inevitable outcome of experimental research. She claimed that the knowledge gained from his case helped develop better treatments that have saved hundreds of other children. What about the lack of informed consent? I pressed. The fact that families weren't told about the deaths and complications happening to other children in the program? She said that full disclosure of adverse events might have caused families to withdraw from the program prematurely, preventing researchers from gathering enough data to develop effective treatments, Mrs. Kowalski reported. She actually seemed to believe that lying to us was ethically justified. Emma's voice was steady but furious. Mom, she showed us a photo on her desk, a picture of herself receiving an award from the European Society for Pediatric Research. The award was for developing the enzyme therapy that's now standard treatment for Tay-Sachs disease. She's been celebrated as a pioneer, while the families whose children died for her research have never been acknowledged. Did you tell her about your work at Mount Sinai? I asked. About how you're helping other families navigate medical decisions? Yes, Emma said. And do you know what she said? She said my career was proof that her research program had been successful, that by saving my life, she had enabled me to contribute to pediatric medicine and help other families. The conversation continued for another hour as the 3 women described their confrontation with Dr. Rodriguez in detail. By the end of the meeting, she had agreed to contribute $50,000 to a fund supporting medical ethics education, but she refused to acknowledge that her research methods had been unethical or to apologize to the families who had lost children. It's not enough, Emma said as our call ended, but it's a start. When Emma returned to New York, she seemed different, more focused, more determined, but also more at peace with the complicated truth of her survival. She had looked into the eyes of the woman whose research had saved her life and cost other children theirs, and she had demanded accountability even when full justice was impossible. Over the following months, Emma used her experience to develop new protocols for family support during experimental medical treatments. She worked with Mount Sinai to establish support groups for families dealing with rare diseases, and she began speaking at medical conferences about the importance of transparent communication between researchers and families. I'll never be able to bring Marcus or Anna back, she told me during one of our weekly dinners, but I can make sure that future families have better information and better support than we had. 3 years later, Emma published a book about her experience called The Price of Survival, A Family's Journey Through Experimental Medicine. The book became required reading in several medical ethics programs, and Emma was invited to speak at conferences around the world about patient advocacy and research transparency. On the 5th anniversary of our meeting with the other families, Emma and I visited Marcus Chen's grave in Queens. Patricia Chen had invited us to join their family's annual memorial, and as we stood around his small headstone, I thought about the impossible choices that had brought us all together. "Thank you, Marcus," Emma said quietly, placing a small dinosaur figurine on his grave. "I promise to keep using the life you helped save to help other families." As we walked back to our car, Emma took my hand, something she hadn't done since she was a small child. "Mom, I want you to know that I don't regret the choice you made 25 years ago," she said. "It was an impossible situation, and you did what any loving parent would do. But I'm glad we found the courage to face the truth about what that choice cost." Looking at my daughter, now 30 years old, successful in her career, and committed to making the world better for other families, I realized that the little girl I had fought so hard to save had grown into exactly the kind of person the world needed. The price of her survival would always be a burden we carried together. But Emma had transformed that burden into purpose, and in doing so, she had honored the memory of every child who had died so she could live.